Hello and welcome to this week's review on the My Hero Academia Vigilantes manga series, and this week we're reviewing the episode titled Find That Resolve, and we kick off this review, as we always do with these reviews, by talking about the positives and the headline positives. I like the banter that we get towards the start of the episode. I feel that it covered a hell of a lot more ground than I was expecting, and I enjoy how loud Cloud teases Eraserhead in this episode. I am a bit pressed for time with all of this. I've got to record a lot of reviews to regain my pace that I had when I was doing the manga reviews a few months ago, but hey, let's get into this. I will just say is that whilst the anime has covered this part of the story, I will not be making any references to what happens next, because I don't want to spoil it for anyone who is listening to these reviews doing their own read along with a manga. Maybe they'll come to the anime at a later point. I don't know, but I'm trying to keep this as spoiler free as possible. With that said, let's actually get to the heart of the review and say that, firstly, I did enjoy the banter that we got with Present Mike and the angry, explodey guy. Look, I can't remember his name. For me, he looks like Biff from Back to the Future if he was an anime school bully character, so hey, from this point on, I'm going to call him Biff. I thought that the little exchange that they had in that scene was fun. In and of itself, there was a nice little bit of fun and silliness there with the fact that the just sheer ego on that guy, the sheer ego on Biff is just on a whole other level, and just the sheer self-congratulatory nature that he has when it comes to all this stuff for the goggles is something I can't help but get a bit of a kick out of, because he has this almost, oh, why did I think of this thing before? I'm so smart vibe about him when he's talking about how great these goggles are when it comes to when they're flying around on these big drone things. I mean, I like it. It's just this very cocky, self-assured vibe that he has. At least he has when he isn't beefing about how much he doesn't like Eraserhead. He is petty, he's arrogant in a way that a lot of school bullies are. But I feel that this conversation reveals something deeper. I mean, whilst I do enjoy the banter, I do enjoy the fact that Present Mike just seems increasingly just exacerbated by how just dumb and arrogant and self-important this Biff prick is. There is an element here that I think does need pointing out, because this conversation is something that reveals a few things here. Or at least one thing that maybe it was revealed earlier and I forgot it or didn't notice it, but this Biff guy, and I know that's not his name, but that's the name I'm referring to, he's from Class 2B, not from Class 2A, and whilst that in and of itself might not seem like a big thing, because, let's be honest, at this point it isn't radically changing the flow of this story, it's still something I hadn't noticed. So if this is something that was said in the past, forgive me for not remembering it, bearing in mind that it's been like nearly a year since we last talked about Vigilantes. But even then, I assume that he was in Class 2A, given that we have those scenes earlier on where he's training with Eraserhead and the others. And I just assumed that Biff would be in the same class as them, and he isn't. And it's obvious, given the way that he acts around Eraserhead, that that's why he is so resentful towards him. He thinks that Eraserhead's quirk is bullshit, especially seeing as Eraserhead can't back up anything about himself in this moment. We see that a few episodes ago when they have the training stuff where, yeah, Eraserhead can disable people's quirks, but he's not good in close combat. He has to have other people bailing him out and getting him out of trouble, whereas Biff feels that, hey, even if he can't use his quirk, he's physically strong enough and physically capable that isn't something he has to worry about, and Biff sees himself as, and I'm sorry, the Biff name, I just keep getting flashes of Biff from Back to the Future, but still, he understandably has his bigger sense of self-importance about it because he sees himself as being the full package, and he no doubt resents the fact that he's only in Class 2B. I mean, let's be honest, he's still at UA, and I can't imagine that UA at this point in its lifespan, at this point in its history, is somehow lesser than it is in the main series. Yeah, like, he's still going to one of the best hero schools in the world, certainly the best in Japan, so a Class 2B here is probably the equivalent to a Class 2A somewhere else. But he doesn't see it that way, and this itself might be further pushed along by the fact that, from what we understand from what we've read previously, Eraserhead isn't supposed to be a particularly great student either. I mean, given by what has been said by his teachers, he's just about average, or slightly above average, certainly academically. When it comes to the various different facets of being a hero, he's not that good at the public relations stuff, he's kind of okay in close combat, but he's incredibly reliable on other people helping him. which is fine, I suppose, as far as professional hero work is concerned, but it limits his effectiveness if he's ever on his own, or, well, if he's on his own and he's just been isolated by everyone else. Apologies for all the edit points, I just had a bit of a tickle in my throat, but in any case, this is creating what I feel is part of the resentment that Biff has towards Eraserhead, that he doesn't see this guy as being worth it at all. It's a similar kind of dynamic as we get with Monoma and Class 1A in the main series, however here it's just outright more resentful and, for want of a better phrase, darker, given the fact this isn't played for laughs in the way that Monoma's resentment of Class 1A is in the main series. I mean, as far as these characters are concerned, it might well come to blows in the not-too-distant future. We won't see it, and that isn't a spoiler because, let's be blunt here, this is only going to end up focusing on this little part of the story. We're not going to get a further deep dive into Eraserhead's backstory, so I guess I can imagine that at some point in the future, Eraserhead and Biff are going to have to put this whole dynamic to rest one way or another, and that's probably the way this is going. The thing I do like about this dynamic is it's the same core concept but a different execution than Monoma. Like I say, while some of it is played for laughs, it's not quite the same. This guy's a meathead to be sure, but that humorous element feels like an addition to it. Yes, when Monoma was first introduced into the main series, he was a lot more of a serious character before he started to pivot more into the manic, crazy guy that his running joke ended up becoming. Here, that isn't the case. If there's any humour to this character, it's in addition to him as a character. It's just a further evolution and a further underlying of just how petty and bitchy that he really is, when he is just a more threatening character overall. And this itself, this whole sequence of events, this whole discussion is more than just banter. There is an element of world building here. Not as far as the wider world is concerned, but it gives us more of an insight into the minds of our characters at this point. So, really, it's more a matter of character building than world building, but you get the idea. This isn't just a bright little bit of fun to have towards the start of the episode. It's giving us an insight into the relationship between these characters and how to contextualise that, both in this moment, how it might well end up going in future years with these characters studying and working alongside one another. And we do get a similar kind of dynamic, a similar kind of moment of banter with Loud Cloud and Eraserhead helping kids from the local play school. It is something that on the face of it is just a little bit of fun banter, but there's deeper subtext here, there's deeper elements to this, to what they're saying, that yes, some of it does feel a bit clumsy, but it does feel to me that the banter that we get with Loud Cloud and Eraserhead is that, look, I'm going to be honest, I think that there's an argument to be made that Loud Cloud's joke about Eraserhead becoming a teacher is heavy-handed. It isn't really foreshadowing, and if it's an attempt to be doing foreshadowing, it's incredibly guileless, if that's really what they're intending to do. I don't think it's smart, I don't think it's clever, I don't think it's anywhere near as sophisticated as maybe it's trying to be, if that is indeed the case. But even still, the way that it is handled and the way that a whole scene is handled, I will give it the credit that it isn't quite as overt as outright saying, oh wow, you should totally become a teacher. As the way that a Loud Cloud saying it, it feels less of a genuine suggestion and just more like a joke on his part. Yes, we can again argue that this is some very heavy-handed foreshadowing, but as far as the text in this moment itself is concerned and how it's presented and how it's written, it does feel like it is a genuine joke on Loud Cloud's part. Yes, it is ironic given what we know of Eraserhead's future, but in truth, I feel that as far as Loud Cloud's point of view is concerned, he's saying that to be just a friend, but also to help build up Eraserhead's confidence. As I mentioned just before, and as we know from prior chapters, Eraserhead at this moment in his life, and arguably in the future, isn't terribly good at the whole public-facing element of hero work. He does not inspire a crowd or an audience or people that are in difficult situations in the way that other pro-heroes like All Might or Captain Celebrity or even characters like even maybe Endeavour or Best Genius. He's just not that kind of person. He's very much focused on getting the job done and saving people. And whilst in this moment in his life he is getting better, we do know that he's that's still something he's struggling with. This is something that was told to us by the teachers a few chapters ago, and it's something that we saw in the prior chapter. He's trying to get better, but he's still too much of an introvert to make the level of progress that he really needs to be a, quote, frontline hero. And Loud Cloud is doing this. Again, there is the meta level of it being some very heavy-handed foreshadowing, but as far as his character in this moment is concerned, it's intended as a little bit of positive reinforcement, and it is done in a way that's casual and jokey. It's there to help him to tell Eraserhead that he can do this stuff, that he doesn't have to force this public-facing side of him. He doesn't have to make a serious conscious effort to do it. He just needs to be himself. Whilst, again, this is the kind of thing that we'd expect characters like All Might and the others to do effortlessly, what Loud Cloud is saying to Eraserhead here is that he's better than he gives himself credit for, and that this is like a foundation that he can build up from. At least, so that he can become someone that can at least do some of this, so that his anxiety isn't getting over him. That he can just do it if he just focuses on the task at hand, or he just accepts the fact that he doesn't need to be All Might, he just needs to be himself. And even beyond the attempt of Loud Cloud trying to help build Eraserhead's character, the way that this dialogue is written still has a human feeling banter to it. I know that's a very strange way of putting it, but I just had a flash in my mind of one of my university lecturers getting upset at me for referring to something as natural, given that means something very different in the context of my studies. It feels very human, it feels very organic, it feels very much like how friends would tease each other. There is nothing about the way that this is said that makes it feel as though Loud Cloud is trying to create a moment. There is no sense here that he's trying to create a learning moment for Eraserhead. There's no sense here that he's being serious about saying, no, you should totally be a teacher. He's saying in a laid-back way because he just wants to encourage his friend to break up a little bit the tension and the anxiety that Eraserhead's going to have in this situation. Also, it's not going to be quite as difficult for him as the frontline hero work that we've seen him do up until this moment. It's still something that Loud Cloud is aware is going to be difficult for him, so he is still trying to help him here. And even if all of this joke stuff and all this banter stuff is just him telling a joke, there's still this sense that there might be some more subconscious meaning for it on Loud Cloud's behalf. That he is doing it because he wants to see his friend thrive and grow and become a better hero, and that he doesn't need to force himself into being something he isn't, he just needs to be a better version of himself. And my final point of praise here is that this episode covered a lot more ground than I was expecting. I know that as far as points of praise may go, that one might sound a little bit artificial and stilted, but this is a chapter that I expected to, at least as far as the material, actually physically what happens within the chapter is concerned, I expected it to be shorter, I expected it to be half as long, I expected there to be this greater and more conscious effort to try and just ratchet up the drama and the tension with increasingly large-scale cliffhangers. And maybe this is part of me just getting back to the pacing and the presentation of the manga and just being familiar with this part of the story from the anime at this point, but I was expecting something shorter, because you could split this up if you wanted to, maybe cut to where we're about to get into the stuff with Eraserhead or slightly just before it. I mean, it'd be unsatisfying, and it likely would break the contract with the publisher, given how short it would be, but it's something you could still pad out. Like, you could easily have ended this with Eraserhead and Loud Cloud just seeing the silhouette of the creature in the background, or even just the bit where we see President Mike and the others in the rubble looking dazed and troubled. Or I'm sure that this is the different way in doing this, but I think this did it the better kind of way. There's a lot of material here to sink your teeth into, and it ends up creating a very cinematic quality to it, even though it is in the form of manga. And the artwork itself, I love it. I love just how much more expressive the artwork in the manga is versus the anime. Just looking at certain stuff, certain moments, and comparing to the anime, wow, this manga is so much better in terms of how it just the look and design of our characters and how they express themselves is so much better. I had a look at something that's coming up and comparing it to the anime. wow, it's so much better in here. But in any case, we'll cross that when we get to it. And in the meantime, let's get to the negatives. And like I said earlier on in the review, I'm trying to keep it so that these reviews are as divorced from the anime as possible. I'm not going to make reference to stuff that happens in the anime as far as what's coming next is concerned, because I have seen the end of this arc. But with that said, I think that we got into this stuff with the speaker, the little gourd speaker thing, too soon. Again, not giving anything away for anyone who has not read this part in the manga as yet. But I feel that this is a story beat that should have come in the next episode. Because we've just seen Lao Cloud getting knocked back and all the dust and such being swerved and whirled around him. And I think that it would have built up better drama had we just had this case of, okay, he's been hit by something, he's been knocked out by something, now Erasehead is on his own, oh god, he's now going to have to fight this giant frog monster, oh god, is he going to do it? And then, maybe towards the start of the next episode, or next chapter, whatever, or maybe slightly therein, that's when the gourd gets thrown out, and, oh hey, now Loud Cloud is going to start giving him the cheering on, and going to start trying to egg him on and build him up to try and save the day. I think that this is a moment that should have been in the next episode, because I think it would have been more terrifying and more shocking as far as building drama was concerned if there was just this sense of just terrible ambiguity of, oh my god, what's happened to this guy? What has happened to Loud Cloud? Is Erasehead really on his own? And whilst it isn't a major flaw, I will see how this is all hangs out when we get to... Well, I was going to say when we get to the end of this arc. There's not going to be an arc storyline review, but there might be a discussion of it more in terms of execution when we get there. But I think this is something that's just done a little bit too soon. Like, literally, had it just been held off for an extra page, it would have been far more effective. But we'll see how this all hangs out later on. With that said, let's get into the overview and say that I think that this is a very solid chapter, a very solid episode, and it's a great way to start the volume. It does feel weird that we are getting into the latter half of a storyline that began last chapter, or rather began last volume. I still think that maybe all this stuff with Erasehead should have been its own dedicated volume. That would have meant chopping and changing things, or maybe this is just a byproduct of just how all this came together as far as publishing these volumes are concerned. But regardless, this is a very solid way to start this volume. This is a very solid way to start things off. Well, all that's done, however, it's time for Comment Corner. It's time for Comment Corner, going to comments from the previous video in this particular review series. Wow, 6 months. We've not talked about Vigilantes since last September. Wow. Anyway, so this is a comment from BigX1, and I did not reply to the text, so wow. Okay, so they say it felt like, this is referring to the previous volume, it felt like it was a good volume overall. I didn't mind the early part being focused on the Sky Egg because it feels like a refresher before the more serious stuff happens next. Looking forward to see what you think of the flashback once you get to it. Thank you for your comment, and given it has been 6 months and you've been consistently commenting on pretty much all the videos, I think you know what I feel of the storyline, at least as far as the anime is concerned. It'll be interesting to see how this all comes together as far as the manga is concerned. If there's any differences, I think they're going to be smaller scale things, but we'll see where it all ends up going. I've only got one negative thus far, and that might be a minor one, depending on how the next couple of next chapters end. We're just going to refer to the chapters as episodes again. I can't make this change in my head yet. As far as the next couple episodes are concerned, we'll see how it all hangs out. Well, that's said, however, let me know what you thought about this particular episode of the manga in the comment section down below. If you loved it or you hated it, let me know. Thank you all for listening, thank you all for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye!
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!